Why was she the only one not taking notes at the briefing table? The others scribbled furiously, pens scratching against thin paper, eyes darting to the projection where objectives blinked in red. She sat silent, hands folded back straight. Her gaze wasn't on the map. It lingered on the corner of the room where a sliver of sunlight leaked through a crack in the blinds, catching dust in the air like drifting ash. They thought she wasn't listening, but she heard everything, every clipped instruction, every unspoken doubt, every breath. Targets confirmed, civilians likely, expect resistance, eliminate threats. The words droned, flat and rehearsed. To the others it was another mission, another town carved into sectors and quadrants. To her it was something else entirely. She didn't measure battles the way they did. Not in territory gained, not in bodies counted, not in the hollow echoes of medals waiting in velvet cases. She measured battles in the weight of hearts saved, the ones that somehow still beat when the dust cleared. That was her calculus, the one she never admitted. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Her hand brushed the scar on her wrist, hidden beneath the cuff of her sleeve. A scar no one asked about anymore. They assumed it was shrapnel. They assumed a lot about her, that she was cold, that she was efficient, that she was built for this. They didn't know the truth, that her silence wasn't strength, it was survival. The commander's voice snapped the room back. Move out at 500, no delays. Chairs scraped, papers folded, boots thudded across the floor. She rose last, gathering nothing because she carried everything in her head. When she walked out, one of the younger soldiers, barely past 20, muttered just loud enough for her to catch it. Does she even care? She didn't answer, she never did, but inside something twisted. The barracks smelled of oil and dust. Bunk beds stacked, lockers dented with history. She sat on the edge of her cot, staring at the photograph tucked into her journal. It was worn soft at the corners, faces faded but not forgotten. A man with a gentle smile. A girl with eyes too bright for the world she was born into. She touched the photo, then closed the journal quietly, as if silence could protect what memory could not. Outside, the engines were already warming. Metal groaned, rotors sliced the air, the low thunder of departure. She pulled on her gear with slow precision, as though each strap and buckle was a ritual against fear. Fear never left. Anyone who said it did was lying. When she stepped into the night air, it was cool, damp, almost too calm. The others laughed in the distance, their voices sharp against the hum of machinery. She walked past them without a word. They fell silent as she passed. Respect, fear, maybe both. Inside the helicopter, the seats were hard, the air thick with the smell of fuel and sweat. She sat opposite the same young soldier who had questioned her. His leg bounced nervously, his jaw tight. He avoided her eyes. She didn't mind. The pilot's voice crackled through the comms. 2 minutes to drop. The helicopter dipped, wind roared. The ground rose fast. She closed her eyes for just a moment, not to rest but to remember. She always remembered before stepping into the dark, because she knew the dark would remember her. The first shots came before the dust even settled. Sharp, cracking bursts. The team moved fast, spreading into position, eyes scanning, rifles raised. She stayed low, breathing steady, heart aligned with the rhythm of footsteps and gunfire. Contact left, someone shouted. She didn't fire, not yet. She watched, listened, waited. Through the haze she saw them, not the ones holding rifles, but the ones cowering behind shattered walls. A mother clutching her son, an old man shielding his face with trembling hands. They weren't on the briefing slides. They never were. Her team pressed forward, bullets tearing through plaster, commands shouted over chaos. But she wasn't looking at the map in her mind anymore. She was looking at the hearts she couldn't let break. Clear the sector, the commander barked. She should have moved with the others. Should have swept the next corner, checked the windows, cleared the street. Instead, her boots turned toward the collapsed building, toward the civilians. The boy's eyes met hers first, wide, frightened, expecting the end. She lowered her rifle, raised her hand slowly, palm open, fingers steady. A silent promise, I'm not here for you. But promises had weight, and sometimes they broke. Behind her, footsteps pounded. The young soldier, the one who doubted her, caught sight of where she was. He froze, confusion written across his face. What are you doing? She didn't answer. She crouched beside the woman, whispered words they couldn't understand but felt. Gentle words carried not by language but by tone. Stay low, don't move. Gunfire raked the street again. The boy screamed, the mother pulled him close. Her hand clenched her rifle, not to fire but to shield. Her body angled between them and the unseen. The young soldier finally lifted his weapon, covering her flank. His breath was ragged, but his aim was true. For the first time, he wasn't following orders. He was following her. Minutes stretched, fire, return fire, shouts, silence. The battle pulled forward, then drifted away like a storm moving past. When it quieted, when dust settled, when only the trembling breaths of survivors remained, she exhaled. The mother clutched her hand. Tears cut clean lines through the dirt on her face. No words, just eyes. Eyes that spoke a language deeper than any briefing. The young soldier stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Why? He asked softly, almost to himself. She didn't answer. Not yet. Some truths needed to be carried longer before spoken. Later, when the team regrouped, no one mentioned the civilians. No one asked where she had been. They only counted ammunition, listed injuries, noted the dead. Metrics of war neatly catalogued. But she carried a different ledger, one the others couldn't see. A boy's heartbeat against her sleeve. A woman's grip refusing to let go until forced. The weight of lives not lost. And as the helicopter lifted them back into the night, she stared at the horizon, not with triumph, not with relief, but with something heavier. Because saving hearts came with its own scars, and hers were far from healed. Why was she awake when the others slept? The barracks was silent, broken only by the heavy breathing of exhausted men, the occasional rustle of fabric, the creak of metal frames. Outside, the generators hummed, steady, indifferent. But she lay on her back, eyes open, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling like they were roads leading somewhere she couldn't follow. Her hands rested on her chest, but they felt too heavy, as though every life she carried pressed down, refusing to let her lungs fill completely. She shifted, sat up, reached for the journal beneath her pillow. Not to write, just to hold. The photograph slipped out again, almost deliberately, as if it wanted to remind her of its presence. The man's smile. The girl's bright eyes. The memory of a promise she hadn't kept. She traced the outline of their faces with her fingertip, careful, reverent. A knock startled her, soft, hesitant, not the kind of knock used in war. She opened the door. The young soldier stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His uniform was wrinkled, his hair damp with sweat. He avoided her gaze. Couldn't sleep either, she asked, her voice low. He shook his head. I know. He glanced past her as if afraid of being caught standing there. Then his words tumbled out. Back there with the civilians, you, he stopped, struggled. Why did you do that? We're told not to, you know. She studied him, the rawness in his eyes, the kind of fear that had nothing to do with bullets. It was the fear of not understanding, of not knowing how to carry what he had just seen. You were told to clear the sector, she said evenly. He nodded. And I was told the same. Another nod, slower this time. She leaned against the doorframe. But orders are written for the battle, not for the hearts caught inside it. He frowned, not dismissive but thoughtful. So you just decide. No, she paused. I choose. The silence stretched. A night bird called in the distance. Someone coughed in their sleep. Finally, he exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing. I thought you didn't care, he admitted, almost a whisper. Her jaw tightened. The words echoed ones she'd overheard earlier, but now they carried no malice, only honesty. "I care too much," she said quietly. "That's the problem." He didn't answer, just gave a small nod, then stepped back into the shadows, leaving her with her journal and her ghosts. She closed the door gently, but the weight of the conversation lingered. He wasn't the first to ask. He wouldn't be the last. By morning, the mission had shifted. The radio crackled with updates, urgency replacing routine. There had been an attack in the neighboring sector. Civilians caught, numbers unknown. Their unit was tasked with extraction support, but the details were thin, intentionally vague. At the briefing, maps were drawn, zones shaded, coordinates recited. She sat silent again, but this time she noticed the young soldier watching her. His eyes no longer carried judgment. They carried expectation. When the meeting ended, the commander pulled her aside. A man hardened by years, his face etched with lines that no rest could smooth. "You've got a reputation," he said flatly. She held his gaze. "Good or bad?" "That depends who you ask." His tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. "I don't care about your methods. I care about results. Don't let your heart cloud your judgment out there." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Sometimes the heart sees what the orders miss. He studied her as if trying to decide whether to argue or let it go. In the end, he simply turned away. "We leave in 20. The convoy rolled out under a gray sky, the kind that pressed low against the earth, heavy and foreboding. Rain threatened but didn't fall. Dust trailed behind armored trucks, rising like ghosts chasing them. Inside, the air was tense, too quiet for a group heading into danger. The young soldier sat across from her again, helmet in his lap, fingers drumming against it. Finally, he asked, "What happens if we find civilians again?" Her answer was simple: "We protect them. And if it costs us the mission." She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. "Then maybe the mission wasn't worth the cost." He swallowed hard, but she saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes. The convoy slowed, brakes hissing, engines rumbling low. The radio spat static, then a sharp voice. "Enemy contact ahead. Ambush confirmed. Hold position." The world outside erupted, gunfire snapping, dirt exploding, metal clanging under impact. Shouts filled the air, orders clashing with fear. She pressed her back against the steel interior, listening. The rhythm of chaos had patterns if you knew how to hear them. Go, go, go. The rear hatch swung open, daylight slamming into her eyes. She leapt down, boots hitting mud, rifle raised. The air smelled of cordite and wet earth. Smoke drifted, acrid and suffocating. Her team spread out, firing, advancing, ducking for cover. She scanned quickly, not just for threats but for signs. Movement in windows, shadows too small to be combatants, the hidden presence of those the mission never named. And then she saw it. A collapsed structure near the road. A faint cry, not the sharp call of a soldier, the thin, desperate wail of a child. Her chest tightened. She froze, caught between instinct and order. "Cover left flank," the commander barked. Her feet refused, her eyes locked on the rubble. The cry came again. The young soldier appeared at her side, breathless. He followed her gaze, his eyes widened. "You hear that too?" She nodded. "Orders say flank." "Orders don't hear cries," she snapped. For a second he hesitated. Then he shifted his stance, rifle up. "Go, I've got you." She sprinted across the mud, bullets kicking dirt near her boots, the sound of rifles deafening. She reached the rubble, dropped to her knees, hands clawing at broken stone and twisted rebar. Her gloves tore, her palms bled, but the cry grew louder. Beneath the debris, a small hand reached out. She grabbed it gently, firmly, pulling, lifting, straining. A boy no older than 5 emerged, coughing, dirt streaked across his face. Behind him, a woman lay pinned, blood at her temple, eyes fluttering weakly. The boy clung to her, sobbing. She pulled him close, shielding him from the chaos around them. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of recognition. The woman's face blurred into another face she once knew, the girl in the photograph, the one she couldn't save. Her throat tightened. For a moment, time fractured. The present collided with memory, and the battlefield dissolved into something more personal. "Ma'am," the young soldier's voice cut through, sharp, urgent. "We need to move." She forced her mind back. The boy, the woman, the cries that weren't past but present. She lifted the child, bracing his weight against her chest. "Help me," she ordered. Together they pulled at the debris, straining until the woman slipped free. She wasn't dead. Not yet. Her breaths were shallow, uneven, but they existed, and that was enough. The soldier slung her arm over his shoulder. They staggered back toward cover, bullets snapping at their heels. Mud splashed, sweat burned, lungs screamed. But they moved, step by step. When they reached the convoy, medics rushed forward, pulling the woman onto a stretcher, checking the boy's fragile body. She stood there, chest heaving, mud dripping from her gear, blood drying on her hands. The commander stormed over, fury etched across his face. What the hell was that? She met his eyes, unflinching. That was the mission. He wanted to argue. She saw it in the tightening of his jaw, the flare of his nostrils. But then his gaze shifted to the boy clinging to her sleeve, refusing to let go, to the woman barely clinging to life. His anger faltered. He turned away without a word. The young soldier leaned against the vehicle, sweat streaking his dirt-smeared face. He looked at her with something new in his eyes, not doubt, not fear, something closer to faith. And for the first time in a long while, she let herself breathe. But the weight didn't lift, because she knew what came next. Saving hearts had consequences, and sooner or later the cost would come due. Why did the boy's eyes follow her even after he was safe? He sat on the medic's lap, wrapped in a blanket too big for his frame, his face streaked with soot and tears. The others bustled around him, tending wounds, cleaning rifles, checking ammo. But his gaze never wavered. It clung to her like an anchor. She tried to look away, tried to focus on her weapon, on routine, on anything that could silence the quiet pull of his stare. But she couldn't, because in his eyes she saw another pair, smaller, brighter, lost. That night she didn't sleep, again. The rain finally came, pounding against the tin roof of the outpost, drumming into the dirt until the whole compound smelled like wet earth and rust. She sat at the edge of her bunk, boots on, rifle beside her. The journal was open on her lap, the photograph exposed like a wound. Her fingers traced the face of the girl in the picture. Not the man, not her, just the girl. "Your sister." The voice startled her. She snapped the journal shut. The young soldier stood in the doorway, hesitant, almost apologetic. She didn't answer. He stepped in, leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You don't talk much, but you saved them. The boy, his mother, that wasn't orders, that was something else." Silence hung. She could have dismissed him. She could have shut him out the way she did with everyone. But something in his face, the raw youth, the unpolished honesty, chipped at her walls. "She wasn't my sister," she said finally, voice low. "She was my daughter." The words felt foreign, leaving her lips, as if they belonged to another life. The soldier froze. "You have a..." "Had," her tone cut like glass. His mouth closed. The rain filled the silence. "She was 7, she continued, not looking at him. "Bright, curious. She wanted to be a pilot like her father, always drawing planes, always asking questions." A small, pained smile flickered across her lips. Too many questions. Her hand tightened on the journal. Then one night the war came home, not to the base, not to the field, to the street where she played, a strike. Wrong place, wrong time, I wasn't there. I was on a mission, saving people I didn't even know, and when I came back... Her voice cracked, she stopped, closed her eyes. The young soldier shifted, his throat working as if words were fighting to escape. But he stayed quiet. "She and her father were gone," she finished, whisper soft. "All I had left was this photo." Her hand trembled against the worn edges. The soldier's eyes softened. His mouth opened, but she cut him off before pity could stain the air. Don't say you're sorry. Everyone says they're sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't stop the sound of her voice in my dreams. He swallowed, nodded slowly. Then why keep going? Her gaze lifted, hard, steady. Because if I stop, then she dies twice. Once to the bomb, once to my silence. The words hung heavy, suspended in the damp air between them. The soldier nodded again, slower this time. No more questions, just understanding. Then he turned to leave, pausing only once at the door. For what it's worth, he said, voice low, today you kept her alive, at least for that boy. And then he was gone. She sat there long after, staring at the closed journal, rain echoing her heartbeat. The next mission came sooner than expected. The outpost received intel about a compound used as a staging ground for enemy fighters. The team was tasked with clearing it, fast, precise, no collateral. On paper, it was simple. In reality, nothing was. They moved under cover of night, boots sinking into mud, the moon veiled by clouds. The air was thick, heavy, clinging to skin. Every step was a whisper, every shadow a threat. She led the flank, eyes scanning, ears tuned to the silence between sounds. The young soldier was on her wing now, his movements sharper, steadier than before. He didn't question her anymore. He followed. The compound loomed, a squat building, windows dark, walls scarred. The team fanned out, rifles raised, breath held. The commander's hand signaled. Breach. The door splintered. The night exploded with shouts, gunfire, the sharp clang of metal. She slipped inside, eyes adjusting, rifle sweeping. The rooms were tight, corners sharp, air stifling. Every sound magnified, every heartbeat thunderous. She turned a corner and froze. Two children, huddled in the dark, clutching each other, eyes wide. Not fighters, not threats, just terrified. Her rifle lowered instinctively. Her chest clenched. She wanted to rush, to shield, to pull them into her arms, but footsteps thundered behind her. The commander. His rifle was already raised. They're not targets, she hissed. He didn't lower his weapon. We can't take the risk. They're kids. Her voice cracked, anger sharpening it. Collateral happens. His tone was cold, practiced. Her hand shot out, shoving his barrel away. The move was instinctive, reckless. His glare seared her. You're compromising the mission, he growled. And you're compromising your soul, she fired back. The children whimpered, shrinking deeper into the shadows. A tense moment stretched, the whole war balanced on a breath. Then the young soldier appeared, rifle steady but not aimed. His voice broke the standoff. She's right, they're not threats. The commander's jaw worked, rage and calculation warring in his eyes. Finally he spat, fine, you take them, but if this costs us, it's on you. She didn't wait. She crouched low, hand extended, whispering soft words, coaxing the children out. Their small fingers clutched hers, trembling, trusting. She pulled them close, heart pounding, every instinct screaming both fear and relief. The mission pressed on, rooms cleared, resistance crushed. The compound fell silent save for the shallow breaths of the saved. When dawn broke, the team regrouped outside, sweat mixing with grime, adrenaline fatting to exhaustion. The commander stalked away, muttering curses. The children sat beside her, wrapped in her jacket, eyes still wide but alive. The young soldier crouched nearby, watching quietly. You know he'll report you, he said softly. She nodded, let him. His brow furrowed, aren't you worried? She looked at the children, then back at him. What's the worst they can do? Take away my orders. I've already lost more than they can strip from me. He stared at her, not with doubt this time, but with something else, something closer to awe. The children leaned against her, small bodies trembling but warm. For a fleeting moment the battlefield faded. The war, the orders, the endless wait, it all dissolved into the quiet miracle of two heartbeats she had kept alive. But deep down, she knew, every choice carved consequences, and someday one of them would come back for her. For now, though, she let herself feel the fragile warmth of what she had saved. Because sometimes, in a world measured by bullets, the only thing that kept her from breaking was the weight of hearts she refused to let go. The desert sun bled into the horizon, spilling red fire across the sky as the last convoy pulled into the forward operating base. Dust rose in thick plumes, curling against the armored hulls of the vehicles, as if the earth itself tried to swallow them back. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the groan of engines shutting down and the distant crackle of radios that carried bad news like a contagion. Alara stepped down from the last armored truck, boots sinking into sand that still radiated the heat of the day. Her uniform was streaked with soot, her hands trembling, not from fear but from exhaustion sharpened into steel. Around her, men and women gathered, their faces shadowed by fatigue, eyes hollowed by the weight of days without rest. Yet all eyes turned to her. She hadn't asked for it. Leadership was a burden thrust upon her, not a mantle chosen. But in the crucible of war, where command structures collapsed and orders vanished into static, soldiers had looked to her not as a superior officer, but as a fortress that refused to crumble. She had been their last unbroken wall. Now, standing in the fatting light, she knew this night would decide everything. The council in the bunker. Inside the command bunker, the air was damp, smelling faintly of metal, oil, and the tang of fear. The room buzzed with quiet arguments as officers bent over maps and digital screens that glowed with red alerts. Drones patrolled the outer sectors, but the enemy was clever, testing the perimeter like wolves circling a wounded stag. Colonel Reese, his arm in a sling, spoke with an urgency that carried the edge of desperation. They're regrouping. The satellites confirm multiple formations pushing from the east and south. If they breach before reinforcements arrive, we'll be overrun. We don't have the numbers to hold them. A silence fell, one that pressed against the walls like invisible weight. Alara stood at the edge of the table, her shadow stretching across the tactical display. The glow illuminated her face, burned, hardened, but unshaken. "We hold them here," she said, her voice even, steady as stone. A captain snapped, "With what, Major? We're bleeding out. Ammunition is low, the outer defenses won't last a second wave, and half of us can barely stand." Her eyes swept across the room, meeting each gaze without wavering. "We are not walls waiting to be broken. We are fire waiting to be unleashed." Reese frowned. "You're asking them to burn themselves alive." "No," she said. "I'm asking them to remember what we fight for. This base is not just steel and sand. It is the last beacon on this front. If we fall, the towns behind us fall. The families who trusted us to protect them, they fall. If we break, there is nothing left to shield them." The silence deepened. One soldier muttered, "She's right." Another nodded, and slowly, like embers catching flame, resolve spread. Alara leaned over the map, her finger tracing the choke points, the high ground, the ridges where the enemy's vehicles would funnel in. "We use the terrain. We bleed them slow. Every second we hold is a second closer to relief. We will not survive by numbers. We will survive by refusing to be broken." Her words did not shout. They did not roar. They carried the quiet conviction of someone who had seen too many fall and still chose to stand. And because of that, the room listened. Night before the storm. Later outside, the night stretched vast and empty, stars scattered across the sky like fragments of forgotten prayers. Soldiers moved through the base, reinforcing barricades, loading magazines, setting traps. Their motions were mechanical, drilled by necessity, but their eyes carried a spark lit by her words. Alara walked among them, her boots crunching softly on gravel, her presence a silent anchor. Some saluted, others simply nodded, and she returned each gesture with a glance that spoke of shared burden. She was not above them, she was among them. In the medical tent, she paused. Rows of wounded lay in cots, their breaths shallow, their bodies broken but not yet surrendered. A medic glanced up, exhaustion painted into every line of his face. "They won't all make it," he whispered. Ilara's hand brushed the fabric of one cot, where a young soldier's chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm. She thought of the fire in their eyes only days ago, the laughter in voices that now spoke in groans. Her throat tightened, but she forced steel into her words. "They will not be forgotten. No one who falls here will be forgotten." The medic blinked, as though those words were a thread that kept him upright. Fire in her lungs. She returned to her quarters only briefly, long enough to peel off her gloves and wash the soot from her hands. Staring into the cracked mirror, she saw her reflection, eyes rimmed with red, lips dry, hair damp with sweat. She barely recognized the woman staring back. But in her chest, fire still lived. Every inhale burned, every exhale felt like steel pressed against her ribs. Her body begged for rest, yet her veins carried heat that no exhaustion could quench. She thought of the words spoken about her by those who had watched her fight. Her veins carried fire, her lungs carried steel. She became the last fortress unbroken. Perhaps it was myth. Perhaps it was just what people told themselves to believe someone among them was more than human. But tonight, myth had to become truth. The storm breaks. The first shell struck just past midnight. The ground shuddered, dust falling from rafters, alarms wailing through the camp. Lights blazed to life as soldiers scrambled to positions, their hearts pounding in sync with the thunder of artillery. Ilara was already on the command line, headset crackling with reports. South perimeter engaged, east side breached, multiple contacts. Her voice cut through chaos. "Hold the line, do not let them through, every second counts." She moved between stations, rifle in hand, shouting orders, dragging sandbags into place, firing bursts into the shadows where shapes emerged. Around her, men and women fought not with hope of victory but with the grim defiance of those who refused surrender. The air filled with smoke, tracer fire painting the night in streaks of red and green. Explosions ripped through barricades, showers of sparks lighting faces twisted in fear and fury. Ilara's lungs burned as she shouted above the roar. Her body screamed for rest, but every nerve in her became an iron wire holding the line together. She was everywhere, pulling a wounded man back into cover, firing until her rifle overheated, throwing herself into breaches where enemies poured like floodwaters. Her fire spread. Soldiers fought harder, eyes fixed on her silhouette that refused to fall. She was not asking them to survive. She was showing them how. Reflection in the storm. Hours blurred into a single heartbeat. The night stretched eternal, broken by flashes of fire. Amid the chaos, she found a moment of stillness, crouched behind a wall as bullets whined overhead, her chest heaving, blood dripping from a gash in her arm. Her hand pressed against the wound, warm and wet, yet she laughed softly. Not out of joy, not out of madness, but because in this moment she understood. The fortress was never the walls. It was never the steel or the guns or the sandbags. It was them, the unbroken hearts, the fire that refused to die. And as long as that fire burned in her, the fortress would stand. The battlefield did not sleep. By dawn, the desert base was no longer a fortress but a scar. Smoke bled into the sky, thick and dark, rising like the ghosts of the fallen. The air stank of burned metal, gunpowder, and blood that baked into the sand. Craters pocked the earth, twisted steel jutted from the ground, and the walls that once stood tall were broken teeth gnawed down by fire. And yet through the ruin, the fortress lived. Ilara stood at the northern barricade, helmet gone, hair streaked with ash, eyes hollow from hours without rest. Her rifle hung from her shoulder, its barrel scorched, its weight digging into bruised flesh. She had stopped counting the hours since the first shell. Time had dissolved into an endless storm where every second was stolen from death. Her body begged for collapse. Her lungs, raw from smoke, burned with every breath. Her arm throbbed where shrapnel had cut deep, bandaged in haste by trembling hands. But none of it mattered. She could not break, not while they watched her. Soldiers of ash. Around her, survivors moved like shadows, their uniforms torn, their faces painted in soot and streaks of dried blood. They were no longer the clean lines of a regiment. They were fragments of humanity bound by one stubborn truth. They were still alive. A young corporal staggered to her side, rifle clutched with fingers blistered raw. "Major," he rasped, voice cracked. "They're regrouping again. Drones say armor pushing from the west. Heavy. Too many for what we've got left." Ilara's jaw clenched. She looked out at the horizon where dust clouds swirled, faint at first, but thickening with the promise of another onslaught. She wanted to close her eyes. She wanted, just for a moment, to let someone else carry the burden. But when she turned, she saw them watching. Soldiers with broken bodies, bandaged heads, eyes rimmed red from smoke and grief. They did not look at her as an officer. They looked at her as if she were the wall between them and the abyss. Her veins burned hotter. "Then we stop them here," she said, her voice low, steady, carved from iron. The corporal's face tightened, but he nodded. Fire from within. Inside the command tent, the atmosphere was suffocating. Maps were torn, screens cracked, radios flickering with static and half-lost calls for help. Colonel Reese sat hunched over, his face pale, bandaged arm trembling as he scribbled notes. When Ilara entered, he looked up, eyes sharp with a mixture of defiance and despair. "They're grinding us down," he said bluntly. "We hold one side, they push another. We can't keep bleeding like this." Ilara planted her hands on the table, leaning over the maps where red markers spread like a disease. "Then we bleed smarter. They think we're weak, fractured. Let them. We draw them in, choke them where they're strongest. Every inch they take will cost them 10 times more." Reese stared at her, searching her face for cracks. But all he found was the fire in her eyes, the steel in her lungs. "You should have broken by now," he whispered. Ilara's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I did, but breaking doesn't mean falling." Letters never sent. That night, in the brief lull before the next assault, Ilara found herself in the bunker, surrounded by silence so heavy it pressed against her ribs. A half-broken lamp flickered weakly, casting long shadows against the concrete walls. On the table lay a stack of envelopes, dirty and creased, letters soldiers had written to families, tucked away in case they didn't see another sunrise. Her hands hovered over them. She had written none, not because she didn't want to, but because she had nothing left to say that could fit inside paper. What words could carry the fire that lived in her veins? What words could explain why she had to be more than human, why she had to stand when everything else begged to fall? And yet her fingers found a scrap of paper. Slowly, with hands that trembled not from fear but from weight, she began to write, not to family, not to command, but to the nameless, faceless tomorrow. "If you read this, it means the fortress stood. Not because of steel, not because of walls, because we refused to let fire die. Remember us not as soldiers who fell, but as those who became the fire itself." She folded the paper, tucking it among the others. A letter never meant to be delivered. Ashes into iron. The next attack came before dawn, a rolling thunder of artillery shaking the very earth. The sky lit with fire, shadows dancing across the ruins. Ilara was at the line again, her voice cutting through chaos like a blade. "Hold steady, choke the gaps, fire in rhythm, make them bleed for every step." Her rifle barked, recoil pounding into her shoulder, muzzle flashing in the smoke. Around her, soldiers fought like shadows made flesh, their bodies battered, their souls burning brighter for it. An explosion tore through the barricade. Ilara was thrown against the sandbags, ears ringing, vision blurred. For a moment, the world spun in silence. Then she forced herself up, blood streaming from a cut across her forehead. Her voice rose again, hoarse but unbroken. On me, push them back. And they did. Not because they believed victory was possible, but because as long as she stood, so did they. The collapse of silence. Hours bled together, fire consuming everything. By midday, the fortress was more ash than stone, more bodies than soldiers. Still, the line held. Still, she stood. In a rare break, Alara found herself crouched beside a dying soldier, a boy no older than 19. His chest was torn open, breath rattling like broken glass. His hand clutched hers, weak, trembling. "Major," he whispered, did we make it matter?" Alara's vision blurred with unshed tears, but her grip did not falter. "Every second mattered, you mattered, we all do." The boy's lips curved into the faintest smile before stillness claimed him. Alara closed his eyes, her hand trembling, her fire flickering, yet not extinguished. The unbroken. By nightfall, only fragments of the fortress remained. The walls were shattered, the defenses torn, the soldiers reduced to half their number. And still, the enemy had not broken through. Alara stood at the center of the ruins, rifle low, chest heaving, blood staining her uniform. Around her, survivors gathered, not in lines of order but in a circle of fire that refused to die. Her voice rose one last time, hoarse, raw, carved from ashes. "We are not walls, we are not numbers, we are the fortress, and we will not fall." And as the enemy massed for yet another assault, her soldiers raised their rifles, their voices rising with hers in a cry that was not of despair, but of fire. Why was the desert so quiet? The siege had lasted for days, each hour dripping with fire, smoke, and screams. Yet now, in the brittle stretch of night, the silence pressed harder than any artillery barrage. It was the kind of silence that made men flinch, that forced breath to sound too loud, that carved doubt into the ribs of every soldier who sat waiting for the next blow. Alara walked the ruins like a shadow. Her boots crunched over shattered stone, the ground slick with dried blood. Around her, what remained of the fortress resembled not a base but a graveyard. Sandbags shredded, barricades burned, towers collapsed into heaps of twisted rebar. She passed soldiers curled in corners, weapons across their laps, eyes half closed with exhaustion yet too afraid to fully sleep. Some whispered prayers, others stared blankly at the dirt. All of them looked at her when she passed, not with words but with the silence of people holding on by a thread. She carried that silence in her chest, heavy and unrelenting. Whispers of doubt. Inside what was left of the command tent, the dim light of a single lantern flickered. Colonel Reese leaned over the table, lips pressed thin, his body shaking with exhaustion. His voice was nearly gone, raw from shouting commands through smoke and chaos. "They're pulling back," he said quietly, almost too quietly. "But not retreating. No, they're preparing, saving their final blow for when we're weakest." Alara lowered herself into a chair opposite him, her body stiff, wounds aching in every muscle. "Then we need to be ready." Reese shook his head. His gaze lifted to meet hers, eyes hollow but honest. "Major, look around you. We're half dead already. Ammunition's almost gone. Medical supplies dried up 2 nights ago. We've sent messages, flares, every damn call for help. No one's coming." The words stung, but they weren't new. She had felt the truth long before he spoke it. Still, she held his gaze, unblinking. "Then we hold, until dawn, until they have nothing left, until one of us outlasts the other." Reese exhaled, the sound broken, bitter. "You don't understand. It's not just the fight. It's what happens if they take this base. They'll cut through the desert like fire in dry grass. Villages, families, thousands with no defense. That's the weight on us, Alara, not just survival, the weight of every life outside these walls." Her chest tightened. She did not respond. She couldn't, because his words were true, and because she had known that truth long before he gave it voice. The faces that returned. Later, as the fortress tried to rest, Ilara sat against the cold stone, her rifle across her lap. The stars above blurred with smoke, faint points of light fighting through the haze. She stared upward, but her mind was not in the sky. It was in the faces of those she had lost. The 19-year-old boy whose last question had been whether it all mattered. The medic with hands trembling from exhaustion, still pressing bandages until her body gave out. The sergeant who laughed even under fire, silenced in a flash of steel. Each face returned, unbidden, flickering like ghosts in the smoke, each one carved deeper into her chest. Her hand trembled over the rifle. She pressed it flat to her thigh, steadying herself. She could not let them see it, the soldiers who still lived. To them she had to be iron, unbending, unbroken. But inside, the fire flickered dangerously close to ash. Her throat ached. In the silence of the ruins, she whispered to no one but herself. "I can't carry all of you, not alone." The desert did not answer. A soldier's story. The silence broke with footsteps. She looked up to see Corporal Valles, a wiry soldier with soot smeared across his face. He lowered himself onto the rubble beside her, rifle resting against his knees. For a while he said nothing. Then, in a voice roughened by smoke, he spoke. "My daughter's birthday is next week. She'll be 6. Ilara turned her head slowly, watching him. "I promised her I'd bring her a seashell from the coast. Thought it'd be funny, you know. A soldier in the desert bringing a seashell home. I even wrote it down in a letter. Now," his voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "Now I'm afraid she'll only get the letter." Ilara's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him he'd see her again, that he'd keep his promise. But the words burned on her tongue because lies had no place left here. So instead, she said quietly, "She'll know you fought for more than yourself. For her. For every child who deserves to have birthdays without fear." The corporal nodded, but his eyes glistened. And in that silence, Ilara felt his weight join hers. His daughter's birthday. Another heart pressed into the fire she carried. The night before the storm. The quiet did not last. At midnight the first sound came, a low hum, distant at first then rising, vibrating through the stone. The soldiers stirred, weapons clutched tighter, heads turned, eyes widened. Drones, hundreds of them. Their lights dotted the horizon like a swarm of fireflies, blinking red against the black sky. Behind them, engines roared, heavy armor grinding across sand. The final push. The storm Reese had warned of. Ilara stood, every muscle screaming in protest, and raised her rifle. Her voice cut through the night, steady, sharp, ironclad. "This is it. They think we're ash. Show them fire still burns." Soldiers rose from shadows, their movements weary but resolute. Positions were taken. Ammunition was rationed into the last desperate handfuls. Even the wounded clutched rifles, refusing to be left behind. In the pit of her chest, Ilara felt the silence break. It was no longer heavy. It was waiting. The storm of fire. The drones hit first, streaks of light in the sky. The fortress lit with gunfire, muzzle flashes sparking like lightning in the smoke. Explosions ripped across the ground, stone crumbling under the storm. Ilara fired until her shoulder throbbed numb, until her vision blurred from smoke and tears. The air filled with screams, orders, and the grinding thunder of armor pushing closer. They fell back, inch by inch, sandbags blown apart, barricades shattered. Every soldier became two, then one, then a shadow barely holding. Beside her, Valles fought like a man possessed. His rifle spat fire until it clicked empty, then he pulled a sidearm, teeth bared in defiance. "For her!" he shouted, voice raw, and charged forward to plug the breach. Ilara saw him vanish in a blaze of fire. Her chest cracked, but her legs kept moving. Her rifle roared, her voice rose, pulling the others with her. Still the fortress bled. On the edge. By the time the horizon began to pale with the hint of dawn, the fortress was no more than rubble. Half her soldiers lay silent. The rest clung to ruins like ghosts, their rifles shaking in hands too tired to lift. Ilara's vision blurred from blood dripping into her eyes. Her uniform was torn, her arm useless, but she still stood, chest heaving, lungs burning. And then quiet. The enemy stopped, engines idled, guns fell silent, the desert stilled. Through the smoke, shapes emerged, not retreating, advancing slowly. Rows of armored soldiers, precise, relentless, a wall of steel against their circle of ash. It was the end. Her body wanted to collapse, to let the ground take her, to close her eyes and let silence win. But around her she felt eyes, soldiers staring at her, waiting, needing. Her throat ached as she forced the words out, steady and low. Even if it's the last breath we take, we make it matter. And as the enemy drew near, Ilara lifted her rifle one more time. Why didn't they fire? Ilara's hands tightened around her rifle as the enemy advanced in silence. The dawn broke pale, casting long shadows across the desert, turning the armored column into a slow-moving wall of steel. They did not rush. They didn't need to. Her soldiers shifted uneasily around her, their boots scraping rubble, weapons trembling in hands blistered raw. The fortress was gone. The barricades, the towers, the walls, nothing left but shattered stone and the stubborn few still standing. The enemy knew it. That was why they walked so slowly, deliberately, a predator savoring its kill. Ilara's lungs filled with smoke and dust, and her voice broke the silence. Stand ready. Not a shout, not a plea, just a steady blade of sound sharp enough to cut through despair. The crack before collapse. The enemy opened fire. A thunder of rifles, artillery shells whistling overhead, drones shrieking through the sky. The ruins exploded with fire and screams, debris raining down like shrapnel rain. Ilara crouched, firing into the haze, her shoulders screaming with each recoil. She aimed not for the armor, too strong, too heavy, but for the cracks, the soft joints, the shadows between steel. Each shot was a prayer, each breath a defiance. Beside her, soldiers dropped one by one, their bodies folding into silence. Yet those who remained fought with the fury of the condemned. They weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting to be remembered. Her rifle clicked empty. She slammed in the last magazine she carried. 20 rounds, 20 heartbeats, 20 final choices. A soldier's last stand. Corporal Valles was gone. She had seen him vanish in fire. The 19-year-old who had asked if it mattered was gone too. Sergeant Corin, the one who told stories to keep them laughing in the dark, gone. What remained were fragments. Half a dozen soldiers crouched in craters, rifles spitting weak fire against an unending storm. One of them, a young medic with blood staining her uniform, crawled to Ilara's side. Her hands shook violently as she tried to reload. They'll break through, the medic whispered, eyes wide, tears carving clean lines through soot. We can't stop them. Ilara's hand reached out, steadying her, not with words, just the press of palm to shoulder, a silent vow. Because she couldn't promise survival, she couldn't promise dawn, but she could promise they would not fall without weight. The voice that carried. When the line faltered, Ilara rose. Her silhouette cut against the smoke, rifle raised, ash clinging to her skin. Her voice rose hoarse, breaking, yet fierce enough to carry above the storm. They measured battles in bullets, she shouted. But we, her chest heaved, her throat raw, but she forced the words through fire. We measure in the weight of hearts saved. Every breath you take here saves someone out there. Hold for them. The words did not give strength to their arms. They did not refill empty magazines, but they gave something else, a reason. And reasons could turn broken men into walls. The breach. The enemy crashed through the ruins, breaching the last defense. Steel met flesh. Rifles cracked into bayonets. Smoke burned eyes. The fight collapsed into chaos. Ilara fired until her rifle spat empty. Then she fought with the butt of it, swinging against armor, teeth clenched, vision blurred with blood. Her body screamed with every movement, wounds tearing open, yet she refused to fall. She heard screams, her soldiers, her people, fading into silence. One by one, their voices were swallowed. And still she stood. She felt hands claw at her, a rifle barrel shoved against her chest. For a moment the world slowed. She saw the enemy's face through the visor, eyes cold, unfeeling. And something within her broke, not into collapse but into fire. Her knife flashed, the soldier fell. She turned, movements ragged but relentless, driven not by strength but by something deeper, refusal. When fire becomes silence, minutes felt like hours. The battlefield blurred into smoke and blood. Ilara's legs gave way, forcing her to one knee. Her rifle was gone, her knife broken, her lungs were fire. Around her silence grew. No more voices, no more comrades, just the echo of boots and the crackle of flame. She looked around at the ruins, once a fortress, now nothing but a grave. She was the last. The enemy closed in, rifles raised, a circle tightening around her. Ilara's chest rose and fell, each breath jagged. She could not fight anymore. Her body was ash. But her eyes still burned. Slowly, with trembling arms, she spread them wide. No weapon, no shield, just defiance carved into her bones. "You can take stone," she rasped. "You can take flesh, but you'll never take the fire we carried." The soldiers hesitated, just for a second, enough to carve her words into the air like smoke that would never fade. The sound beyond silence. And then, a sound split the horizon. Engines, deep, thunderous. Not the grinding of enemy armor, but something sharper, faster. The kind of sound soldiers prayed for but never dared to expect. Ilara's head turned, her vision swimming. Beyond the smoke, across the desert sands, shapes emerged, dark silhouettes cutting through dawn. Helicopters, gunships, reinforcements. The enemy turned, momentarily breaking formation. A storm of fire erupted from the sky, missiles streaking into tanks, drones torn from the air. The ground shook as explosions tore the desert apart. Ilara fell back onto the rubble, eyes wide, chest heaving. She had no strength left to rise, no strength even to lift her hand. But she didn't need to. Because for the first time in days, the fire was not hers alone to carry. The unbroken weight. As gunships screamed overhead and soldiers stormed the desert, Ilara's vision dimmed. She felt hands lifting her, voices calling her name, the press of cloth against wounds. Her body wanted to give in, to slip into silence. But somewhere in the distance, she thought of the boy who had asked if it mattered, of the corporal who promised seashells, of every soldier whose face returned to her in the smoke. Her lips curved into the faintest, broken smile. "It mattered," she whispered. And then her eyes closed. She stared at the map lit faintly by the dying fire. The lines and circles looked meaningless now, ink on paper for a mission already concluded. But in her mind, every mark bled into a face, a moment, a sound she could not forget. She pressed her palms against the cool dirt, steadying herself against the memories that came uninvited. The camp was silent. Even the air seemed hesitant to move. Across from her, Reyes was already asleep, his breathing heavy, chest rising and falling like the tide. He had finally given up pretending he could keep watch, his exhaustion winning. She didn't wake him. He had earned the rest. Her eyes drifted to the stars. Cold, scattered fire above the ruins of a mission. Some called them guides, others promises. For her, they were reminders. Each one shone with someone she had failed to save, each flicker a weight she carried in her chest. Why had she survived when others had? The question pressed like a knife against her ribs. Survival wasn't always victory. Sometimes it was punishment. A rustle, she froze, hands sliding to the grip of her sidearm. The sound was small, cautious. She waited. Another rustle, closer now. Her heart quickened, but she didn't move. A shadow broke from the trees, small, hesitant, not an enemy, a child. He couldn't have been older than 8. His hair was matted, his clothes torn. He stared at her with eyes far older than his years, eyes that had seen too much. He held nothing but a dented canteen in his hands. She lowered her weapon slowly, raising her other hand in a gesture of calm. He didn't run. He simply stood, trembling but unbroken, as if he had already run out of fear. "Water," she whispered, pointing at the canteen. He nodded. She poured from her own supply, careful not to startle him. When he drank, she saw the dirt streaking his face, the cuts along his arms. She saw hunger, but also something else: resilience. Behind her, Ray stirred awake. He blinked, disoriented, then saw the boy. His expression softened. Without speaking, he reached for the rations in his pack, tearing a piece of bread and offering it. The child accepted but did not smile. Silence stretched. Only the crackle of the fire filled it. Finally Ray spoke, voice low. "We can't leave him here." She already knew, but the thought clawed at her chest. Taking the boy meant more risk, slower movement, more danger, but leaving him, that wasn't an option she could live with. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Was she saving him, or for herself, to silence the guilt of all she hadn't saved before? The boy sat near the fire, clutching the bread as if afraid it would vanish. His eyes never left her. Not fearful, not grateful, simply watching, as if measuring her worth. And she wondered, what did he see? A soldier, a savior, or just another uniform who couldn't promise tomorrow? The night deepened. The stars pressed closer. She didn't sleep. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed outward, hand resting near her weapon but her mind elsewhere. Because tomorrow they would move. Tomorrow they would walk into a world still burning. And tomorrow, this boy's fragile trust would weigh heavier than any rifle. The fire crackled once, flaring, then softened to embers. The boy curled against his knees, finally letting sleep take him. Ray's was already lost to dreams again. But she remained awake, alone with the silence. And in that silence, she understood something she hadn't dared admit until now. The war wasn't measured by how many enemies fell, nor by how many missions were marked as complete. It was measured in the fragile breaths of those who survived, because she refused to let them be forgotten. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She pulled her jacket tighter around the boy, shielding him from the cold. Then she let the silence linger, long, steady, unbroken, like the last fortress of a heart that had chosen to carry others when the world demanded she carry only a weapon. And in that silence, the story ended.